back to our channel. Today we will be discussing the E2 visa requirements and going into the components of an e-visa, who qualifies, how do you qualify, and what are the components of an E2 visa. And the highlight of an E2 visa is it's for investors. These are international investors that are looking to buy businesses in the United States or to start their own businesses in the United States. And we're going to go into the eligibility criteria, the application process, and talk about some of E2 visa cases we've done in the past. And a lot of the questions around E2 visa surround like what type of business even qualifies for an E2 visa, right? Can what I plan on doing in the U.S. qualify me for an E2 visa? So we're going to go into all those details. So first, what is an E2 visa? Who is an E2 visa for?
So an E2 visa is a immigration visa to allow you to live and work in the United States based on an investment you make in a U.S. business, and either the startup of a new U.S. business or the purchase of an existing U.S. business or part of an existing U.S. business. There's multiple different ways that you can invest in these businesses in order to qualify you to come in and to run it, to manage it, and control it.
So, and an E2 eligibility is based on treaties. So the United States has treaties with multiple different countries for E2 visa purposes. And one of the countries,
not every country.
Not every country.
Right.
There's a lot that aren't. You can't get an E2 visa if you're coming from North Korea. Sorry, doesn't exist.
Right, and we should also note here that it's based on country of citizenship, not country of birth. So even if you were born in a country that perhaps doesn't have a treaty with the United States for E2 purposes, if you obtain the citizenship of a country that does have that treaty, you would qualify for an E2.
And in this case, Canadians.
Right.
So Canadians, Canada is on the list. Canada is one of the countries that if you are a citizen of Canada, you can qualify for an E2 visa based on investment. And again, it's important to note, citizen. So you can't be a permanent resident of Canada. You can't have a tourist visa or whatever it is in Canada and qualify. You must be a citizen of Canada. Now, there are some components of an E2 visa, and let's go over those high-level components of what qualifies for an E2 visa. Well, the first one is investment. Now,
yeah, that's the main one, right?
That's
investor visa.
It is, but it's also probably the most ambiguous component, which it shouldn't be, but it is. People say, that's probably the most common question. Hey, I want to buy a business in the U.S. How much money do I have to invest?
Yeah, that's probably the number one question. Like, how much do I have to put into this business?
Right? It should be the number one question.
Yeah.
You're investing, so how much?
And money isn't unlimited for most people, so they need to know. And a lot of people are looking to put in the bare minimum to qualify, which really isn't the way you should look at it. No. But a lot of people are like, what is the cutoff, right? Under which amount am I going to be denied?
Yeah, which I guess is a reasonable question, but at the same time, if somebody's asking me that, then I start to question whether or not they're legitimate about this. Like, are you really wanting to do business in the U.S. or are you just doing this to try to get a visa, right? What is the bare minimum? To me, that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, hey, I want to buy a hair salon in the United States. That hair salon is going to cost me $80,000. Would this type of investment qualify for an e-visa? Glad to have that conversation.
It could.
Right?
Right.
Versus, hey, I want to move to the U.S. How much money is it going to take me to move there? Well, I like to see people with more substantive plans that have thought this out.
We field calls like that too, though, right? Where people are just at the beginning stages of thinking about, hey, I want to buy a business. How much am I going to have to invest? What kind of business am I looking at? We field calls like that, but it's a lot harder to direct
your
people.
Questions.
Yeah, because it's all hypothetical at that point.
And we're not business advisors. We're not going to say, hey, this type of business is better than that.
Right.
We handle the immigration component. So you really should have thought about this and thought it out. Okay, I've researched this. I've researched the United States. I've found what state I want to do business in. I found the type of business that I want to buy or invest in. Right? You should have really gone through this in your head before you get to the immigration component. And then once you've thought that out, okay, I've identified this business, and let's just stick with a hair salon. I've identified a hair salon. Actually, I'm going to use an active case that we're working. I've identified a hair and nail salon in Florida,
Right.
and I'm purchasing this. Now, in this aspect, we're talking about an existing business. But keep in mind, for an E2 visa, it can be either a new, in other words, you're starting something from scratch, or it can be existing. I'll tell you right now, the consulate looks more favorably on an existing business for obvious reasons. An existing business is already going to have the components necessary to prove that this is an active operating company, right? Because it's active and it's operating.
Yes.
But beyond investment, and let's hit on investment. So when you look at the regulations, investment, it does not give a specific dollar amount. It gives examples. And the number that's often thrown out there is $100,000. And that's typically a safe number. If you're somewhere in the $100,000 US dollar range for an investment, depending on the business, then it's typically going to be safe for an e-visa.
Well, we also have to take into account the proportionality test, right? So if you're investing $100,000 in a $20 million business,
proportionally, that's not enough.
That's not going to be sufficient.
Why though? Because
or if you're investing $100,000 for a small interest in a company, it's not going to meet the ownership requirements. So the amount
you have $100,000 in Apple shares.
Yeah, exactly. That's
okay.
not going to be an investment that's going to allow you to control anything there.
So control, you just hit it. So the amount that you're investing in this company should also indicate you have control. So you have to have at least 50% controlling interest in a company to qualify for an e-visa. So 100% is the easiest. You buy a new company, you're the owner. But if you have other partners, you need to be majority to qualify for an e-visa.
Right, because you have to be coming to direct and manage. Is that the statement? Direct and manage the business. And if you don't have a controlling interest, you're not going to be able to direct anything. You're going to be taking your orders from someone else.
So taking the example you gave into account, if you're putting $100,000 into a $20 million company, there's no way you do not even have anywhere close to 50% interest in that company at $100,000.
Right.
So you cannot show that you have a controlling interest in that company. Now, if you're buying an $80,000 hair salon and you are the sole investor, well, you have 100%, you're fully invested. They're going to look at some components beyond the investment amount. Now, people will ask, well, how low can you go for investment? Well, there really isn't a too low. I've done these for very small companies where the investment was between $30,000 to $50,000 and it still qualified.
Yeah, that can work.
But there are other components they look at to determine.
I wouldn't do an investment of that amount where someone wasn't 100% owner of the company.
And those ones are typically existing companies you're buying.
Yes.
That have employees and a track record that the consulate can look at to determine eligibility.
Right. So if someone called and said, "Hey, I want to invest $50,000 in a business, and I'm going to be a 50% shareholder in the business," yeah,
that's marginal.
Yeah.
So there's a component that's called marginal. I would say that's not. That would not.
I mean, marginality goes to what the business is going to generate to support you and your family, right? So
and U.S. workers, right?
Right. So marginality is the measure of whether the business is there just to support you and your family. If that's the case, if it's just you and your family that are going to work there, and that's who the business is going to support, that business will be considered marginal, and it will not qualify for E2. You have to have, and typically we look at a business plan to demonstrate this, especially if it's a startup, the intention to hire U.S. workers and to support people outside of your family as either part-time or full-time employees on the books of your business.
And again, they don't give a number for that.
They don't, right.
in my experience dealing with the consulate over the years, if you get under 3 full-time workers, they don't look too favorably on that type of investment. So I use 3 full-time workers or more. Are you going to create full-time jobs in the United States for U.S. workers beyond you and your family for at least 3 full-time U.S. workers? And is that investment going to be, somewhere around the $100,000 range? That's typically a safe investment. So you're buying a hair salon, 80,000, a little under 100. You maybe that hair salon already has 5 workers at it.
Right.
That would meet the components of, okay, you invest a substantial amount of money in that hair salon. You're buying it for 80. It's worth 80. It has 5 full-time workers. You're creating jobs for people other than you and your family too. So this is not marginal. It's not just for you to come and provide a living for yourself. And we see that a lot. People say, I just want to leave Canada, I want to sell my house, and then they just want to go to the US. And maybe it's a viable business that they're buying, but they're buying it from a US citizen, right? And if they're buying it from a US citizen, that US citizen is the only one operating the company. Well, that's fine for the US citizen to do that. They can do that all they want.
Right.
But as an e-visa holder, if you're buying a solo operation, that doesn't work.
No.
That business would have to have the potential to grow and then provide jobs for U.S. workers. Right. If you can show you can take it from a solo operation to a multi-person operation, then that could work. But you have to be careful. Marginality is one of the key components. So is it substantial? In other words, is your investment amount in that company considered a majority of that investment, right? Are you going to have a controlling interest in it? Marginality, are you creating jobs for U.S. workers and not just providing a living for your family in the United States? Also, there's a often overlooked component, and that is an e-visa is single intent. It's only a non-immigrant visa.
Yes.
So you need to maintain your ties to your home country, which can become a little bit sketchy in these situations where somebody will sell their house, quit their job, give up everything in Canada, and say, I'm moving everything to the U.S. and I'm going to buy a business there. Well, does that work? Well, as far as the e-visa criteria goes, it probably does, depending on what you're buying and how many jobs you're creating in the U.S. You have to be careful about what intent are you showing at the consulate. Because if you can't indicate to the consulate that this is temporary, that you have intention to return to your home country, Canada, and you've maintained ties to Canada, they can deny the e-visa on that basis alone. Even if it's a substantial investment, even if you're creating jobs for U.S. workers. If they don't think you're going back to Canada, they don't have to approve your visa. So you have to maintain that component too.
We should talk about the 2 different ways you can apply for an e-visa, because there's 2 approaches you can take. You don't have to go to the consulate. If you're in the United States, you can file an e-application as a change of status in the United States.
So you're as a visitor.
Or you're working maybe on a TN visa and you're like, you know what, I want to be self-employed. I'm going to find a business broker. I'm going to buy a business, and that I'm going to change my TN. I'm going to change it to an E. It was pretty common to do that during COVID when people were not traveling. But people should know that if you are applying for an e-visa through USCIS, you do not have travel eligibility on the basis of that approval. So even if you were to get approved through USCIS, you're actively running your business in the United States, and you're like, oh, you know what? I want to go to Mexico on a vacation. You can't leave the United States on the basis of that approval and come back in e-status. You would need to make an appointment at the consulate and go through the entire e-visa application process with the consulate, not just an interview. We're talking about the whole application process at a consulate outside the United States.
They're going to review it de novo from the beginning.
Right. So they may make a different decision. They may come to a different decision than USCIS.
And the consulate, in my experience, is more difficult than USCIS is.
Well, they're reviewing for different things, right? There's no background check with respect to an e-application with USCIS.
They're not issuing a visa like they are through the consulate.
Right. So the consular officer review is a little different.
More thorough.
It's a little more thorough. And certainly people with any kind of criminal background, maybe you're admissible to the United States as a visitor, you may not get approved for an e-visa. And we've seen this happen before. People don't tell us that they may have had an arrest or a conviction in their past. We get to the interview and they're like, they're filling in their DS form and they disclose that they've had some kind of criminal interaction in the past, maybe 20 years ago.
They snuck through the border because they didn't really
or
look
they
at
were
it.
admissible to the United States.
The
Their
consulate
conviction,
provides another level of
their conviction didn't make them inadmissible to the United States, but the consulate decided that they didn't want them in the U.S. just because of that conviction, and they can make a determination on multiple other factors once that comes to light. So you need to address that up front with your attorney if you're pursuing an E.
So let's talk about that in more detail. So the common scenario in which we see that is a Canadian will come into the United States as a Canadian visitor, as Canadians can. They'll come in and then they'll identify a property in the United States that they want to purchase, and they'll buy that. And they'll buy it as a visitor, which you can. You can come in and buy that as a
like
visitor.
a residential property, right? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily residential. It
Even
can be commercial.
Yeah.
You're buying it for investment purposes, right?
Yeah.
So they come in and they say, okay, this hair salon, I want to buy it. They put up the 80 grand, they buy it. And now they say, you know what? I need to stay here to oversee this business. I can't go back to Canada.
Right.
Well, I need a visa to do this, however. So what are my visa options? Well, you have two options. The one is the one you just discussed. If you're already here in the United States, you can do what's called a change of status that will take you from a visitor to an e-visa person. And it'll allow you to stay and manage and direct your business on an e-visa. Now, there are limits to that. The main limitation is what you said. First, you're just changing from a visitor to an investor. It doesn't give travel authorization.
Right.
So you cannot leave the U.S. You can stay here and
nobody's going to stop you from leaving, but if you do, you're not coming back in any status.
Correct. You cannot leave. It doesn't give you travel authorization to leave the U.S. If you do, you need to get authorization to return. The second component is it's only 2 years. They're only going to grant you a 2-year authorization to manage your business.
So you got to renew it every 2 years in the U.S.
Every 2 years in the U.S. without the ability to leave, without getting authorization to return. Now, for some people, this may make sense. Maybe that business requires you to be there and you need to be on site to help this business operate. And it makes sense to get that initial 2 years. And then in the meantime, you could then also submit an application to the consulate because maybe you have to travel in the future. So, but that...
We saw that a lot during COVID, right? So people
they
were
did
in
it
the
by
US,
mail,
they're like,
so
I
they
can't
didn't have
travel
to
anyway.
travel.
Right, I can't travel anyway. I got this business I just bought. I want to run it. Let's file with the USCIS, and I'll do the consulate later when COVID's over and deal with
and
that.
Most people will do it at a later date. Maybe it depends on your business and your situation. You can't travel right now, so you need the ability to stay here and manage and run your business. So that in that case, the 2-year limited USCIS E2 visa approval might work for you, but you just need to remember that it's only going to be for 2 years. And it doesn't grant authorization to leave and come back.
And that's rarely something people we talk to are interested in.
Yeah, Canadians want to travel.
Canadians, like we said before, they do not like being stuck in the United States. We don't like it. So we want to be able to go back to Canada. If that's something you want, then you might as well just file right with the consulate.
Yeah. And we've done many by mail with USCIS. Actually, like them, again, I think they're easier than the consulate. But by mail with USCIS, we've done many of them. But you need to be aware that if you leave the U.S., you're not coming back on an e-visa unless you go to the consulate and submit an application.
We should talk about one major issue that you have to do that. So one factor that I talk to people about when they want to do that is the maintenance of status issue that comes up with USCIS.
You're a visitor.
Because you're a visitor and now you've bought a business, they want to know between the time you bought that business and the time that you got approved for this application, now that we're now looking at, who was running the business? Because if you were doing it as a visitor, you didn't maintain your visitor status and now you're no longer eligible for an E. Thank you very much. So the best technique to use in order to do that is to have a U.S. business partner. have somebody with a minority holding in the business that can
or
run,
a
that you can point
director
to.
or manager, somebody
Yeah,
that's going to
someone
be.
you can say, hey, so, well, even if you have a
So
director
for
or
a new,
manager, if you have someone that you're managing, that doesn't qualify. You need somebody with an ownership interest that has, can of their own volition run the business while you step back, get the visa first, and then step in as the manager.
and that can be really problematic
Mm-hmm.
if it's a new company.
Oh,
Existing
absolutely.
companies, it's a little easier to show you have other individuals that are managing, directing the company other than you. But a new company from scratch, try showing USCIS that you're on owning or operating, hiring, and
I've
doing
done it,
business activities.
but
It's
only
much
when
more
they
difficult.
have a business partner that is a U.S. person.
Yeah. So that's a good point to bring up. You need to make sure that when you are filing with USCIS, you can show maintenance of your visitor visa, that you did not do anything that would violate that visitor visa status.
Yeah.
So that's filing with USCIS. So it's limited to 2 years, doesn't give authorization to leave and come back. You can leave, but you can't come back until you get authorization.
Right,
to
and
do
be
so.
mindful of that maintenance of status issue for that.
And then the other one that we see most often Canadians take advantage of is the consular E2 application. Why? Well, number one, you get a 5-year unlimited travel visa.
I think that's the longest non-immigrant status
5 years, yeah,
that you can get, right? I mean, besides a B1, B2 visitor,
which is 10.
but you can't stay for 10
Canadians
years.
don't
You
get
can't
that,
stay
but-
for 10.
No, you can only stay for 6 months.
Right. So
you'll get a 10-year visa, and this is one of the only times a Canadian will actually get a visa picture, foil, stamp, whatever you want to call it, in your passport.
yeah.
That says e-visa that you should present at the border when you want to come in, and they'll look and see you actually have a visa in your passport. Now, it's issued for 5 years, but you're only admitted for 2 years per stay. But at the end of the 2 years, you just return to the border, show that your business is still active and operating. They'll give you another 2-year stamp, and then finally a 1-year stamp. And then at that point, you would then get an extension at the consulate. So the USCIS extensions are limited to 2 years at a time in no travel. These ones to the consulate are 5 years at a time with unlimited travel. And either or can be extended indefinitely as long as you show that you are maintaining that non-immigrant intent or ties to your home country. So the huge advantage of the consular one is it's 5 years. You don't have to do this application process every 5 years. And you can travel back and forth as much as you need between Canada and the US without issue, without abandoning your status. Another advantage of E2 visa is a spouse gets what's called E2S status. And this, I think, is one of the most often underlooked components of an E2 visa. The spouse, in my opinion, benefits way more than the investor does. Why? Because the investor is tied to their business. So when you get an E2 investor visa, you are tied to your hair salon. You're managing, you're running, you're operating that hair salon. That's what you're authorized to do. Well, your spouse is going to get what's called E2S. And E2S is E2S for spouse, is exactly what it sounds like. But they get what's called unlimited work authorization, meaning you can work for anybody you want in any profession, doing whatever you want legally in the United States as a worker. You could work for McDonald's, you could work for Uber, you could start your own business, you could work as an engineer, whatever you qualify or get a job for in the US, you could start your own company. It doesn't matter. The spouse has unlimited authorization. So when I'm talking to individuals about e-visas, I have that discussion with them. Because oftentimes they want to find out, well, does it make sense for me to get it or my spouse to get it? Sometimes they'll have a spouse who's going to have, maybe they won't have that active of an involvement in the business, but they put them as the investor. Why? Because the other spouse wants to have more unlimited opportunities in the United States.
I've done that a lot too, yeah.
So one of the huge advantages of an e-visa is the spouse gets that unlimited authorization. Now,
you got to make sure that the spouse has some kind of qualifications to run a business. So.
Yes, if you're going to put another spouse on it, they're going to look into your ability to direct and manage that business. But remember, and this comes up all the time with Canadians, you have to be legally married. So Canadians, there's a lot of common law relationships in Canada. U.S. does not recognize Canadian common law. So if you're doing this, make sure you are actually legally married, or else your spouse is not a spouse for immigration purposes in the United States. So some things to keep in mind. Now, applying for the process is different with consulate and with USCIS. With USCIS, it's a mail-in paper application. You fill out the appropriate forms. You provide the proof of your investment, your source of funds, your business plan, tax returns, whatever it is you have to support this business in the U.S. And you submit it by mail with USCIS, and then they will issue an approval that comes on a piece of paper. And it looks actually very informal, saying that, hey, you've been approved. Now you're authorized to stay in the U.S. for 2 years, starting from July 1st, 2024 until, the end of June 2026, right? And you'll get this thing by mail that shows that you've been switched from a B visa to an E visa, and now you can stay, or whatever the scenario is there.
Right.
With the consulate, it's a very different process. It's actually an email submission. Which
every consulate's different around the world.
So for Toronto,
for Toronto,
it's an email submission, and the only consulate that does it is Toronto for an initial. So if you're doing a new business or a re-registration of a business, it has to be done through Toronto,
right?
And it has to be done by an email submission. They have very specific format for the submission, page limits, and forms that have to go along with it. Everything's done electronically. They will receive it.
And
they'll review it.
They just limited the amount of pages that we can submit
too. Shortened it by even more. So you have to. These applications have become even more difficult
it's kind of crazy because they've shortened the amount of documentation you can provide, and then they issue a request after asking for more documentation.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like they want you to show substantial trade or substantial investment. Well, if we can't submit substantial amount of documents, how are we supposed to show that? If it's not all in one transaction. So that's another thing you need to think about when you're doing this. If you're buying an existing business, sometimes it's just one financial transaction that takes care of it. That's, you can demonstrate on a couple pieces of paper. If
it's a new company,
we just did one. Oh my gosh, it was in over a period of 3 years investing in this startup of this business, and the amount of financial documentation that we had to submit was exorbitant, and it couldn't fit. And we tried every way possible to get it demonstrated in the initial submission, and there was just no way. It ended up getting approved because you do get to go to the consulate for an interview, and you can bring the entire application with you at that point. And I think the officer was then able to review and see all of the transactions that took place over time. But it can be a little bit difficult to demonstrate on the initial application process if you are doing a startup.
And if you're not familiar with the process, good luck getting an e-visa approved at the consulate. We see people that try on their own all the time and get refused just because the process is so cumbersome. Even if you've done it many times like we have, it's just not a very transparent process. You really have to know what you're doing.
The transparency is definitely.
It's awful.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a client right now who's going through the process and is frustrated with the interview setup part. Well, we don't control that. We've done the submission with the consulate. It's all there electronically, and you kind of sit in limbo without any communication. Hey, what's going on? Is something wrong? Well, no. The consulate will then reach back out after they've reviewed it and say, hey, we need more documents, or they'll say, okay, time to set up an interview. So,
we've even been, I know I have been at, attorney kind of meetings and things like that, where they have the consular officer from Toronto there, and we're asking pointed questions of them about the process, and they refuse to provide. They're not saying I'm not answering your question, but their answer is always, it's a case-by-case basis.
Trade secrets, they're getting it all.
And so they don't even give the information to us, which makes it very hard to advise clients on the specifics of the process. We know how it works. We know there's a lot of situations where it's not a bright line test. It can be very, hard to determine whether or not a case is going to be successful or not on the face of the information initially provided by a client. But we know the process. We can help you with it. It's just very frustrating sometimes, even for us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's much less transparent than the mail-in application with USCIS is. So, especially when you're applying at a consulate, I would say in both cases, you should use an attorney when you're doing these types of applications because they're much more complex than other types of visa applications, but especially at a consulate. Consulates can be very difficult to deal with. Now, we've done these for all types of businesses under the sun. So let's just go over some of the different e-visa companies that we've represented, some ones that come to mind. The first one that comes to mind for me, I did a trailer park. So an individual bought a trailer park.
I've done a trailer park too, and I have another one on the go right now. It seems to be popular investment.
Well, you also did one, and one of her paralegals actually has an RV that she goes and stays at, and it's actually at one of our clients' RV parks.
Yes,
they bought an RV park, right?
Yep.
I've seen.
I did a nail salon,
hair salon, spas, real estate property management companies. Now you have to be careful there. You can't just have passive investment in real estate. That's getting
we get that question a lot too. Can I just buy a house and then rent it out? No, it's not. No. You need to have a portfolio of homes.
And we just had one of those approved where they have multiple properties.
Yeah, I did one like that too.
Property manager as well as maintenance personnel, and they actually have a company.
Someone bought a strip mall. I think you've done one with a
couple of
commercial
mall. Franchises are some of the most common. We actually did
storage units,
e-visas for the first Tim Hortons franchise ever in the U.S. We were able to assist with that individual. Now that individual owns multiple Tim Hortons throughout.
You got to be careful with the fast food restaurants, though. A lot of those franchise agreements don't allow for ease. So
Subway.
if you're looking at franchise, you got to make sure that
it qualifies. Yeah. Subway explicitly stated that you can't get an e-visa for Subway anymore. So you can't do that for Subway, but a lot of them still allow it. And I've seen pet groomers, car lots, people selling cars and having car. They have.
Yeah, we did one for a car. I've done one for a couple car sales lots and businesses that sell and resell cars.
Done for IT companies.
A lot of consultants. Pool routes. Someone bought a portion of pool routes from a pool service company, and
also they go and manage the pool routes if you're American.
It's roots.
Roots. I'm like, roots. You're pulling roots out of the ground to make pools.
Pool route. Yeah.
A pool route. Yeah. UPS stores.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah. UPS stores.
Those two. But if you get our picture
like
here,
mailboxes,
etc. Even
so these are smaller ones, and we've done some larger ones too.
Yep.
With bigger manufacturing companies, and
those are ones of the easiest ones, right?
Retail, a lot of online sales companies too, like Amazon resellers and Amazon businesses that they're selling their products on Amazon. There was one I got approved. I was very surprised it was approved. It was a very limited retail selection of goods, but it was approved.
I had another company, they just sell dog accessories, so for pets.
Yeah.
That does that. But it really is no limit if you get where we're going here. If it's a legitimate business in the United States, it can be a franchise type opportunity. It can be a new business, an existing business. As long as you're a substantial investment in that company, you're creating jobs for U.S. workers, then
and it's a viable business.
Correct.
You're not going to be successful getting an e-visa selling, something that people don't need. You got to have a little bit of business acumen.
And that's why they require a business plan.
And so when people call me and they say, "Hey, so I'm thinking about the e-visa, where should I start?" You know what I say? Contact a business broker. See if there's a business out there that's already doing what you want to do that's for sale.
And the U.S. government actually has a resource, and we have it on our website too, where they have a tool where you can look up possible investments in the U.S. They actually provide resources for e-visa investors where you can go in there and look through the government resources, and they'll give you ideas of where you can invest your money in the United States. There's U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a lot of resources out there to help you if you're looking for a place to invest. We don't advise on that. Again, that's
business
up to
broker.
you.
I say contact an independent business broker in the area where you want to live and work.
Yep.
And they'll have local businesses that are for sale, that maybe somebody's retiring and they've got a good viable business that they want to sell.
And those are some, you brought something to mind that I think is very important. We handle the immigration aspect of this.
Yes.
So we're going to help you get the visa. But there are other things that we can't do for you and that you should not do on your own. If you're doing business in Florida, contact a business attorney in Florida who's going to help you with the transaction of the business and is also going to help you properly incorporate or form your entity.
Because that Florida lawyer is going to know what registrations you need, what kind of filings you need, what licensure you need in that state. We don't know that. That's a business attorney's information, and it's jurisdictional. Yes. So you really need a business attorney in the location. You're going to be glad you have that person.
California.
As you're running that business and issues come up, you're going to be glad you have that contact and that person that you can reach out to.
So it must be it's state specific,
whereas
immigration is federal. So we can help you no matter where you're going to do business in the U.S., but you should also have a local attorney to assist with the business matters, local accountant to help with the accounting matters, because it changes by jurisdiction.
And sometimes people are like, oh, I'm just going to go on and use like LegalZoom to get my documents.
Don't do that.
Well, the problem there is when you're applying for an e-visa, it's all document based. We already talked about the submission we're making to the consulate. USCIS, there's no interview. You're just only putting papers in. Don't you want those papers to be as perfect as possible? They're not going to be if you use a
and we will give pushback, and we often do, and clients get frustrated. Well, why are you being so difficult on me? We're not.
Right.
We're applying the standards of the consulate or USCIS. This is their requirement for documentation. And it's our job to make sure the documentation you're giving us passes muster. Because if you can't get through us, you're not going to get through the USCIS or the consulate. That's for sure. So we would rather give you a hard time about your documents and make sure it's in order. And people say, oh, you're slowing down the process. Oh, you're delaying this. No, we're not.
I've seen people that have presented documents to me that were purchasing a business from someone, and they had mixed up who the seller and who the buyer was in the actual purchase agreement.
Yeah, future dates, unsigned documents. We see all sorts of
It's a mess. So the best thing to do is get an attorney, make sure your documents are immaculate, and then that way you're going to have a much easier time with this application. Trying to do it yourself and create your own documents, unless you're a business attorney yourself, licensed in the state where you're doing business, which, hey, maybe you are. Your own advice is probably not the one you want to take on that.
Yeah. So work with licensed professionals in that area of expertise, also that jurisdiction of the United States, to make sure you're getting proper representation. So e-visas, they're accessible.
Yeah.
If you have the money and you're looking to commit an investment in the United States that's going to create jobs for U.S. workers, we do them all the time. I think it's a great option for Canadians looking to do business in the United States.
Yeah, we should probably talk about this again sometimes, because there's a bunch of stuff we didn't talk about today, like the source of the investment and all of those kind of details surrounding the financial transactions.
Yeah, that's a specific conversation in itself, right? Because you have to track the money. Where did you get this money? They need to make sure it came from a legal source, right? And you have to track the money from.
You could probably do a whole podcast on source of investment. Yeah.
Yeah, source of investment is another very important component of the e-visa. But in general, I think we covered it high level. That's what an e-visa looks like. It's a substantial investment in either a new enterprise in the U.S. or an existing enterprise in the United States. You're going to be the majority owner of this enterprise. You have the nationality of the company, which here would be a Canadian company because you're going to be majority owner, and you're creating jobs for U.S. workers. You're not just doing this for a personal investment or personal income for you and your family.
Or buying a house.
Buying a house. So residential properties do not work. This must be a commercial enterprise.
I think we get inquiries about that at least once a week.
Yes.
Hey, I bought a house in the U.S. Can I use it as a business?
And a lot of people just want to use this as a mechanism to get to the U.S.
And mostly it's Canadians asking in the fall when the weather starts turning.
Or when COVID hits, or whenever something else, maybe there's an election and they don't like what happened in the election.
But usually the fall.
Yeah, the fall. The fall can do it to anyone, right? Especially when the snow starts to fall.
Yeah.
Then they want to get out. Well, hopefully you found this conversation informative and you were able to learn something about E2 visas and investing in the U.S. and obtaining an E2 visa for that investment purpose. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share this with others out there that you think would find this content helpful. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day.